The galaxy froze the moment the crown lit up for someone who was never meant to matter. And the impossible part? It answered the touch of a quiet worker the elites didn't even see. So before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, subscribe to join this constellation of humans, and let's start the story. The gravity field stabilizer hummed wrong. Elias Monroe crouched in the maintenance shaft 3 floors below the Crown Hall, datapad casting blue light across his tired face. 3 in the morning. The tower slept above him, hundreds of species dreaming in their expensive quarters, unaware that the platform keeping them suspended above the clouds was held together by someone they'd never meet. He adjusted the torque on the compensator coil, listening to the shift in frequency. Better. Not perfect, but enough to last another month before the next adjustment. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, scarred fingers finding holes in the machinery that the original installers had probably never considered. A memory flickered, his brother's laugh, bright and careless, echoing through another maintenance bay light years away. Then screaming. Then silence. Then a supervisor's voice reading from a tablet. Mechanical failure, human error, case closed. Elias closed his eyes, took a breath, opened them again. If my work stays invisible, that's perfect, but nothing fails under my hands again, not while I'm still breathing. He finished the adjustment, logged it in his personal records, not the official ones. The official logs would just generate paperwork, questions, committees. Better to fix things quietly. Better to be the person nobody noticed. The archive level was quiet when he surfaced, boots clicking softly on the polished floor. Lysara sat at her terminal near the back, fingers moving across holographic keys, transcribing another ambassador's speech about duty and tradition, and other words that meant nothing when you were the one erasing typos from their self-important declarations. She looked up when his shadow crossed her desk. Gray-blue eyes, deep and careful. Pearl-toned skin that caught the light from her screens. Black hair pulled back in a braid so tight it had to hurt. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she replied, voice barely above a whisper. He held up the thermos of coffee from the break room, 3 hours past drinkable. She smiled just slightly, and pulled out a small container with some kind of seed cake she'd made in the communal kitchen on her level. They'd been doing this for months now, ships passing in the infrastructure of a tower that treated them both like furniture. "Another brilliant speech today?" he asked, sitting on the edge of her desk. Lysara's fingers paused over the keys. Lord Chiron spent 45 minutes explaining why the crown of Orin must be awakened for a new era of guided prosperity. She made air quotes with 2 fingers. He cut the part where I'd included the actual historical context about how the crown has refused to activate for anyone in 3 generations. Elias snorted. Of course he did. Can't have facts getting in the way of theater. She looked at him then. Really looked, and for a moment he saw past the careful posture, the apologetic shoulder curve, the way she made herself smaller in every room she entered. There was someone sharp underneath. Someone who'd been filing away truths while everyone else performed. "You ever wonder," she said quietly, "why we're the ones who see it all but nobody sees us?" He thought about that. About gravity fields adjusted at 3 a.m., about reports filed that nobody read, about a brother's death marked down as acceptable loss. "Maybe," he said, "it's easier to take care of things when you're invisible. Less people trying to stop you from doing what needs doing." Lysara smiled, sad and knowing. "Or maybe they made us invisible on purpose. Easier to ignore what you've decided doesn't matter." Before he could answer, his datapad chimed. Anomalous energy reading in the Crown Hall sensor grid. Minor fluctuation in the artifact containment field. He frowned. The crown of Orin was supposed to be inert, dead relic, ceremonial paperweight from a civilization that had vanished before most current species had even achieved spaceflight. "Probably nothing," he muttered. "But I should check it." Lysara's fingers had gone still on her keyboard. "Be careful," she said. "Lord Chiron has been pressuring the science teams to find ways to force the crown to respond. He wants his nephew recognized as regent." Elias stood stretching his back. Crown doesn't work that way. According to the legends, it only responds to someone with real responsibility, genuine empathy, and the guts to say no to power. He grinned, dry and humorless. Pretty sure that disqualifies everyone currently trying to wear it. She looked down at her terminal, at the speech she was cleaning up, at all the recorded words from people who believed they deserved to rule simply because they'd been born into the right families. What if, she said softly, the crown reacted to someone like us? Do you think the universe would even be ready for that? He didn't have an answer. The sensor reading spiked again on his datapad. This time, it resolved into something clearer. Not a malfunction. Something else. Like the crown's ancient systems were waking up. Not fully. Just enough to start paying attention. In the depths of the crown hall, buried in crystalline matrices that predated galactic civilization, Sigma Orun's consciousness stirred from millennia of patient observation. 2 patterns detected. Monroe, Elias. Protective action without witness. Accountability without recognition. Lisara, designation unknown. Truth preservation without voice, accuracy without acknowledgement. Analysis, relevant candidates identified. Continue monitoring. Elias left the archive with his coffee, heading toward the service lifts. Lisara watched him go, then returned to her typing, erasing another politician's lie, replacing it with something that sounded noble enough to pass through without anyone noticing the difference. Neither of them saw the faint pulse of light that flickered once in the crown hall above, then went dark again. But in the shadows of the sleeping tower, something very old had decided to start keeping score. The crown hall filled with bodies and cameras 3 days later. Lord Chiron Thalos stood at the center of it all, silver hair catching the light, metals glinting on his ornate jacket. He was Draven, a species that had mastered the art of looking important, and he wore authority like other people wore skin. Elias watched from the maintenance alcove near the eastern wall, technically present to monitor the environmental systems, but really just trying to stay out of sight. The hall's sensors were registering unusual power draws, small fluctuations in the crown's containment field. Nothing dangerous yet, but wrong enough to make him nervous. Lisara stood at the very back, tablet in hand, recording everything for the official archives. She was so still she might as well have been part of the furniture. Nobody looked at her. They never did. Lord Charon's voice boomed across the hall. We stand at the threshold of a new age. The crown of Orun, silent for generations, shall speak again. It shall choose worthy leadership for our united galaxy. Elias had read the actual historical texts. The crown didn't choose leadership. It recognized it. Big difference. One was about authority. The other was about something the current crop of aristocrats wouldn't recognize if it bit them. The ceremony began. One by one, nobles from major houses approached the crown. It sat on its pedestal like a ring of living metal, crystals dark, perfectly inert. Each noble placed their hand on it with varying degrees of theatrical confidence. Nothing happened. The first 3 took it well. The 4th looked annoyed. By the 8th, people were shifting uncomfortably. Chiron's smile had developed an edge. Ambassador Drex of the Karath delegation stepped forward, cleared his throat importantly, and placed his scaled hand on the crown with enough force to make Elias wince from across the room. Still nothing. Perhaps, Drex said loudly, if the human technician had maintained the systems properly, we wouldn't be experiencing technical difficulties. Elias felt every eye in the room that bothered to look down suddenly find him. Heat crept up his neck. The gravity stabilizers are functioning at 98.3% efficiency, he said, keeping his voice level. The crown systems are independent of tower infrastructure. This isn't a technical failure. Drex sneered. How convenient that the young species claims no responsibility when things don't function. The murmurs started then, quiet but audible, about humans being too new to galactic society, about giving them responsibilities beyond their competence, about how typical it was that when something important needed to work, a human was somehow involved in the failure. Elias's jaw tightened. He'd heard variations of this his whole career. Earth was only 3 generations into galactic contact. That made humans the newest kids in a very old school, and some species never let them forget it. From the back of the room, Lysara's voice cut through, soft but clear. The crown is functioning exactly as designed. It's not responding because none of the candidates meet its criteria. A few heads turned. Most didn't. Karen didn't even acknowledge she'd spoken. But Elias heard. He looked back, caught her eye. She gave the tiniest nod. Karen clapped his hands together, smiled back in place. Well, we shall reconvene with a more formal ceremony. Clearly the crown requires proper context. He paused, eyes scanning the room, landing on the back where Lysara stood. And perhaps we shall invite broader participation. After all, we wouldn't want to be accused of elitism. The way he said it made it sound like a joke. Like inviting common workers to touch the crown would be the height of absurdity. Lysara's knuckles went white on her tablet. The crowd dispersed. Elias filed his environmental report, all systems nominal, and made his way back toward the archive level. He found Lysara in the small break alcove near her workstation, hands shaking as she tried to pour water from a container. He took it from her gently, poured it himself, handed her the cup. "You didn't have to say anything," he said. "Someone had to." She drank, swallowed. "I'm tired of watching them blame others for their own failures." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Elias said, "They're going to do it, aren't they? The formal ceremony. And they're going to make a show of inviting common people just to prove the crown won't respond to us either." Lysara nodded. Kairen announced it officially an hour ago. Full galactic broadcast. Open participation. She looked at him. They're going to humiliate someone, that's the point. To prove that only nobility matters. Deep in the Crown Hall, Sigma O-Run processed the day's interactions. Subject Monroe defended operational integrity under social pressure, deferred to accuracy over self-protection. Subject Lysara spoke truth in hostile environment despite personal risk, defended allied unknown to her, cross-reference detected, mutual protection pattern, shared value system identified, truth over comfort, accuracy over politics, protection of others over self-advancement, analysis, patterns strengthening, emotional resonance detected, empathy quotient significantly elevated, recommendation, increase monitoring priority. Elias walked Lysara back toward her quarters, taking the long way through maintenance corridors. She seemed steadier now, but there was something fragile in the set of her shoulders. "Thank you," she said as they reached her level, "for not making me feel stupid for speaking up." "You weren't stupid." He hesitated, then added, "You were right. They just didn't want to hear it." She smiled, tired and sad. "Story of my life." She disappeared through the door, and Elias stood in the empty corridor for a long moment, thinking about crowns that recognized truth, nobles who performed power, and the particular kind of tired that came from being invisible in a tower full of people who believed they mattered. His datapad chimed. Another fluctuation in the crown's systems, stronger this time. The crown was waking up, and nobody in charge had any idea what that actually meant. Lysara made it 3 halls past the council chamber before the walls started closing in. The meeting had been brutal, not violent, nothing physical. Just 2 hours of senior archivists explaining very patiently that her transcription of Ambassador Vekran's trade proposal had been too literal, that she should have understood the implied deletions, that accuracy wasn't always appropriate when dealing with delicate political language. Translation: she'd written down exactly what Vekran had said, including the parts where he'd quietly suggested relocating an entire labor colony to make room for expanded mining operations. Someone higher up had wanted that detail softened. She'd refused to change it without official authorization. They'd made her sit there while they discussed her inability to understand nuance, her lack of political awareness, Her persistent issues with overstepping her role as mere transcriptionist. Nobody had raised their voice. That was the worst part. They'd been so calm, so reasonable, explaining why someone like her needed to learn her place. Now she couldn't breathe properly. The corridor spun. She put her hand on the wall, trying to remember the breathing exercises, trying to push down the panic that said you're going to get erased again, they're going to make you disappear, you're too much trouble and not important enough to protect. Elias, she whispered to no one, and then he was there, appearing from a maintenance access with a toolkit slung over his shoulder, taking one look at her face and immediately understanding. "Come on," he said quietly. "I know a place." He led her through passages she'd never seen, service corridors that threaded between the public levels like veins through flesh. No cameras here, no ambassadors, just the hum of the tower's machinery and the sound of their footsteps on metal grating. They emerged onto a small external platform, technically a maintenance access point for the tower's upper shield generators, but someone, probably Elias, had rigged up a safety railing and cleared enough space to sit. The city sprawled below, lights glittering through the evening clouds. Above, stars were starting to appear. He sat. After a moment, she joined him. The air up here was thin but breathable, cold enough to shock the panic back into something manageable. They sat in silence for 10 minutes. 20. However long it took for her breathing to even out. "I come here when I need to remember I exist," Elias finally said, "when the tower gets too heavy." "It's beautiful," Lysara whispered. He nodded. Then, carefully, "You want to talk about it?" She did. She didn't. She opened her mouth and found words coming anyway. "I was born in a conflict zone." Her voice was steady, detached, like she was reading someone else's history. "Political upheaval. My family was on the wrong side of whoever won. I was 7 when they brought me here. Told me I was lucky. Told me my family's records were lost in the chaos, but I could have a fresh start." Elias listened, didn't interrupt. "I found partial files once," she continued, "years ago, buried deep in the legacy archives. My family wasn't just political. They were ideological opposition to the aristocratic council system. They wanted elected representation, real democracy." She laughed, brittle. "Guess that made them dangerous enough to erase." "That's," Elias started, then stopped. "That's fucked up is what that is." Lysara looked at him. "I spent my whole life being told I was lucky they let me stay. Lucky to be alive. Lucky to have work." She swallowed. "And I believed it. Because what else could I do?" She turned to the stars. "But lately I wonder if being lucky and being erased are just 2 words for the same thing." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My brother died in an industrial accident 3 years ago." She turned, eyes wide. He was 21. Working maintenance on a cargo hauler, new job. Wanted to prove himself. The shift supervisor told him to bypass a safety check because they were behind schedule. He didn't. He went to double-check the coupling integrity anyway. She laughed. "But I wasn't there. I was off shift, thought he could handle it." The supervisor got impatient, manually overrode the lockout while my brother was still in the bay. "Oh no," Lysara breathed. The official report called it human error. Technically true. Specifically, my error for not being there. For not training him better. For not checking the systems myself. Elias's voice stayed level, professional, like he was filing a maintenance report. "My father still doesn't talk to me, not in any way that matters. He just asks about work, about whether I'm keeping things running safely, like if I can keep enough systems functional, maybe I'll make up for the one that mattered most." Lysara reached out, slow enough that he could pull away if he wanted. She took his hand. Elias looked down at their linked fingers like he'd forgotten hands could do that, could offer comfort without expecting anything back. "That wasn't your fault," she said. "Wasn't it? The person who died was doing the right thing. The person who caused it was cutting corners. That's not the same as you not being there." Elias's jaw worked. "I know that. Logically. But logic doesn't stop me from waking up at 3 a.m. to check systems that don't need checking. Doesn't stop me from running redundant safety protocols nobody asked for. He squeezed her hand. I can't save him. Can't go back. So I just make sure nobody else dies on my watch, even if they never know I was there. Maybe that's the best way to save people, Lysara said softly, quietly, without them knowing, because you're not doing it for credit. You're doing it because it matters. Is that why you write down everything accurately, even when they tell you not to? She nodded. If I erase the truth, even small truths, I become part of the system that erased me. And I can't. She looked at him. I can't be the person who makes someone else invisible. They sat with that. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of ozone and distance. Maybe we're invisible, Elias said, because it's easier to take care of others when nobody's watching. When there's no audience to perform for, no credit to chase, just the work that matters. Or maybe, Lysara said, they made us invisible because people who tell the truth and check the safety systems are inconvenient. Maybe invisibility isn't about us, it's about them. Deep beneath them, in the Crown Hall, Sigma Oran recorded a new data point. Bond depth. Profound. Shared trauma converted to mutual care. Protection instinct. Reciprocal. Values alignment. Absolute. Analysis. This is what the Crown recognizes. Not power, not lineage. This. Two beings who carry pain and transform it into protection of others. Status. Priority monitoring increased to level 1. Candidates confirmed. Lysara leaned her head on Elias's shoulder. He stiffened for just a moment, then relaxed. Let her stay. If the Crown ever did react to someone like us, she murmured, do you think the universe would be ready? Elias looked at the stars, at the tower below, at all the powerful people sleeping peacefully because someone else kept the systems running. Probably not, he said, but maybe that's exactly why it should. 3 days later, Lord Chiron officially announced the mandatory public ceremony, full galactic broadcast, open participation required from all levels of tower staff. No exceptions. The Crown Hall was packed. Every screen in Corona Spire carried the feed. Across the galaxy, billions tuned in to watch the theatrical revival of an ancient ritual. Lord Chiron had marketed it perfectly. Tradition meeting modern democracy, nobility extending its hand to common workers, proving that the Crown recognized worthiness regardless of birth. Elias knew propaganda when he saw it. This wasn't about inclusion. This was about publicly demonstrating that the Crown would never respond to anyone but the elite. A way to put the lower levels back in their place with cosmic authority. He stood near the environmental control panel in his cleanest maintenance uniform, datapad ready in case any of Chiron's theatrics actually damaged something important. Lysara was at the back with the other archivists, tablet recording everything, shoulders curved inward like she was trying to fold herself small enough to disappear. Chiron stood at the center platform, magnificent in silver and gold, voice projecting across the hall without amplification. For too long, we have allowed this sacred artifact to sleep. For too long, we have let fear of unworthiness prevent us from seeking the Crown's guidance. Today, we prove that nobility of spirit exists at every level of society. Beautiful words. Complete bullshit. The ceremony began. House Thalos representatives went first, of course. Chiron's nephew Darren approached the Crown with practiced confidence, placed his hand on the metal surface, waited. Nothing. He smiled graciously and stepped back. Next came representatives from the major species coalitions, Draven, Korath, Valori nobility, even a few human diplomats from the Terran delegation. One by one they touched the Crown. One by one, nothing happened. The crowd grew restless. This was supposed to be the moment of glory. Instead, it was turning into an uncomfortable repetition of the same failure. Chiron's expression remained pleasant, but Elias could see the tension in his shoulders. The Lord needed something to shift the narrative. needed someone to blame or mock or redirect attention from the fact that his entire political stunt was collapsing. His eyes scanned the crowd, landed on the back section, found Lysera. "And you there," he called out, voice cutting across the murmurs. "The archive assistant. You're recording this, yes? At least appear engaged with the ceremony." Lysera froze. "Or are you so accustomed to being nobody that you've forgotten how to lift your head?" A few people laughed. Not many, but enough. That polite social laughter that means, thank God he's targeting someone else. Elias felt his stomach drop. Felt the old paralysis trying to take hold. The same freeze that had kept him off shift when his brother died. The same instinct that said, keep your head down, protect your job, don't make waves, let someone else deal with it. Karen gestured to his guards. Bring her forward. Let us demonstrate that the crown recognizes worthiness at all levels, or, he paused theatrically, that perhaps some people are meant to observe history rather than make it. The guards moved toward Lysera. She clutched her tablet like a shield, face pale. And Elias remembered watching his brother walk into that bay alone. Remembered thinking someone should say something. Someone should stop this. Someone should tell the supervisor he's wrong. Remembered that he'd been that someone, and he'd stayed silent. Not this time. "Sir," Elias said, loud enough to carry. The hall went quiet. Karen turned slowly, eyebrows raised. "She's not part of the ceremony roster. She's working. If you need someone for your demonstration, use your own family members. I'm sure you have plenty who haven't tried yet." Someone in the crowd snorted, quickly covered it. Kyron's smile froze in place. "And who exactly are you?" Elias stepped forward, away from the wall, into the open space where people could see him. Just the idiot who keeps this whole hall from falling out of the sky. He gestured around at the environmental systems, the gravity stabilizers, the structural supports. If you want to humiliate someone, at least don't pick the people who hold the paperwork you can't even read properly. The hall erupted in shocked mutters. Nobody talked to Lord Karen like that. Nobody. Karen's expression shifted, cold amusement replacing performative warmth. Perfect. His voice dripped with satisfaction. "We shall elevate 2 nobodies today." He pointed at the stairs leading to the crown. "Both of you, up." Guards moved to flank them, not arresting, but the message was clear. Refusal wasn't an option. Elias met Lysera's eyes across the hall. She looked terrified. He probably did too. But there was something else there. Something that hadn't been there in the archive that first night. Recognition. "You saw me. I saw you. We're in this together now." They walked toward the stairs. The crowd parted. Cameras focused. Across the galaxy, billions watched 2 insignificant workers approach a throne meant for gods. Karen followed them up, making sure he stayed in frame. "Observe, Galaxy," he announced. "We extend the crown's judgment to all. Behold, as these common workers, these invisible maintainers of our infrastructure, touch the sacred artifact and—" He paused for effect. "Receive the same silence that proves their proper place." Lysera reached the top step first. The crown sat on its pedestal, dark crystal and dormant metal, beautiful and dead. She stared at it, hands shaking. Elias stepped beside her. "If you don't want to," he whispered, "I'll say it was my fault. That I touched it first. That I triggered some kind of field reaction." "No," she whispered back. "I've spent my whole life letting other people speak for me. Maybe it's time I put my hand where everyone said it doesn't belong." She reached out. Elias watched her fingers extend, watched her take 1 breath, 2, watched her decide to be visible for the first time in her life. She touched the crown. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the crystals ignited. Light exploded through the hall, golden and blue racing up the walls, cascading across the ceiling in patterns that hadn't been seen in 3 generations. Symbols formed in the air, ancient language spinning around Lysera like she was the center of a star being born. A voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere, cold and vast and absolutely certain. Candidate detected. Pattern analysis. Empathy elevated. Ego minimal. Courage under construction. Status: qualified to bear crown in shared mode. The hall was silent except for the hum of ancient power waking up. Karen stood frozen, face cycling through shock to rage to something approaching genuine fear. Elias moved without thinking. One step toward Lysara, pure instinct, reaching to protect or support, or just be there because that's what he did. That's who he'd become in 3 years of trying to make up for not being there when it mattered. The crown's light shifted, grew brighter, pulled him in. Human moral reference detected. Relevant bond, technician Elias Monroe. Record accessed, multiple acts of protection without witness. The hall erupted, shouting. Confusion, cameras going wild. But Elias could only stare at the light surrounding them both, at Lysara's shocked face, at the ancient machine deciding that 2 people everyone had ignored were exactly what it had been waiting for. Sigma Orun's voice continued, implacable and certain. Crown Protocol rejects those who rise on name without action, accepts those who carry weight without witness. Elias tried to back away. This is wrong. This has to be a mistake. But the light held him, and deep in systems that predated human civilization, something that had waited for exactly this decided that maybe, finally, the right people had arrived. The projections started without warning. Holographic displays erupted from the crown systems, filling the air above the crowd with images pulled from years of security footage that nobody had known was being recorded. Scenes played out in golden light, each one a moment that Elias had thought was private, invisible, forgotten. There he was, 3 months ago, crawling through a ventilation shaft in the lower residential levels at 4 in the morning. Not his sector, not his responsibility. But he'd noticed a pressure drop in the readouts and went to check it anyway. Found a failing regulator that would have vented atmosphere from 40 family quarters by morning. Fixed it without filing a report because filing reports meant committees, delays, someone might have died waiting for approval. Another scene. Elias teaching a group of Valori maintenance workers the emergency evacuation routes, going over the protocols 3 times, making sure they understood every backup option. His off-shift time. No pay for it, just the knowledge that if something went wrong, they'd have a better chance. Another. Elias staying late after a shift, running redundant safety checks on systems that had already passed inspection, because passed meant good enough, and good enough meant there was still a chance of failure. The crowd watched in silence. These weren't heroic acts. They were small, invisible. The kind of work that nobody notices because it's designed to prevent disasters that never happen. But there were hundreds of them, years of them, a pattern of someone who'd turned guilt into a mission, who couldn't save his brother, but could save everyone else if he just worked hard enough, checked carefully enough, stayed vigilant enough. Lysara's voice cut through the silence, steady despite the tears on her face. I've been called nobody my entire life. She turned to face Karen directly for the first time. But I know the weight of every evacuation document I've archived. I know how many escape routes you cut for budget efficiency. I know how many names disappeared from the records because they weren't from important families. Her hands had stopped shaking. The crown's light pulsed around her like she was learning to breathe with it. And I know who shows up at 3 in the morning to fix valves in sectors nobody visits, just to make sure that if something goes wrong, the air keeps flowing to the people nobody thinks about. Sigma Orun's voice resonated through the hall, each word carrying the weight of ancient authority. Crown Galactic refuses those who elevate themselves on name without substance, accepts those who carry burden without audience. Analysis complete. Pattern confirmed across 817 individual acts of protection. Subject Monroe. Qualified for advisory role. Karen found his voice. This is a system malfunction. He pointed at Elias with a shaking hand. Humans tampered with the energy fields. This girl has no lineage, no training, no qualification for. He stopped because Lysara was laughing. Not cruel laughter, not mocking. Just the sound of someone who'd spent so long being told they were nobody that the absurdity of the situation had finally broken through. No lineage. She wiped her eyes. Lord Karen, you signed the order that erased my family's records. She looked directly into the cameras, directly into the billion eyes watching across the galaxy. My name is Lysara Telvaris. My family advocated for democratic reform, for elected representation instead of inherited power. And you had their records deleted when I was 7 years old because they were ideological threats to your system. The hall went silent. Sigma Orun systems activated deeper protocols. Archival records, long hidden, began flooding the main displays. Family trees, political manifestos, documentation of a systematic purge of reformist voices across a dozen worlds. Names that had been erased. Children who'd been orphaned and told they were lucky. Entire movements that had been written out of history. And there, in the middle of it all, was a little girl with gray-blue eyes. Lysara, at 7, before she'd learned to make herself invisible. Before she'd learned that survival meant silence. The crown pulsed brighter. The light around Lysara intensified, responding not just to who she was now, but to who she'd been denied the chance to be. Karen's face had gone gray. That's, he started. Those records were sealed for. For what? Elias's voice was quiet, but it carried. For protecting a system that decides some people matter and others don't? For making sure nobody asks uncomfortable questions about who gets to lead and why? He looked at the crown, at Lysara, at all the people in the hall who were seeing years of invisible work made suddenly, undeniably visible. I don't want this, he said. I fix things. I keep systems running. I'm not, he gestured helplessly, I'm not crown material. Lysara turned to him. Her hand found his. The crown's light wrapped around both of them, recognizing the connection that had been building in quiet conversations and shared silences. Maybe that's exactly why it chose us, she said softly. Because we know we're not ready. Because we're afraid. Because we understand what it costs when people fail. Sigma Orun's voice, somehow gentler now. Crown protocol designed for those who understand weight of responsibility, not those who seek it, those who carry it despite cost. Elias looked out at the crowd, at faces from every species, every level of the tower. In the upper galleries, he could see the workers, the maintenance crews, the archivists and janitors and technicians. People like him, people who kept everything running while others took credit. They were all watching, waiting to see if someone like them could actually matter. He thought about his brother, about all the times he'd wished he could go back, just once and do it differently. Be there, say something, stop the disaster before it started. He couldn't go back, but maybe, just maybe, he could make sure that from now on, the person who said, "Wait, that's not safe," would be someone who couldn't be ignored. Lysara squeezed his hand. You don't have to, she whispered. I'll understand if you walk away. But he was already shaking his head. Not because he wanted this, because someone had to be the person who checked the systems, and if that someone now had the authority to make sure those checks actually mattered, then maybe his brother hadn't died for nothing. The crown began to hum, a sound that resonated through crystal and metal and bone. The light surrounding them intensified, preparing for something the galaxy hadn't seen in generations. Sigma. Orun's voice filled the hall one more time. Recognition confirmed. Candidates accepted. Proceed with coronation protocol. The ancient machine had made its choice. Now it just had to see if two broken people who'd learned to care for others were ready to let the galaxy care about them. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Representatives from 100 worlds shouted questions. Cameras swarmed closer. Security tried to establish a perimeter around the crown platform, while Karen's advisors formed a defensive wall around their lord, damage control protocols already activating. But Sigma Orun wasn't finished. The ancient AI had been watching for generations. recording every discrepancy between public statements and actual policy, every gap between noble rhetoric and practical reality. It had been waiting for someone who cared about truth more than career, someone who'd preserved evidence even when ordered to destroy it. It had been waiting for an archivist. Lysera stood in the crown's light, tablet still clutched in her hands, and something in her expression shifted. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something harder, something that had been filing away injustices for years, waiting for a moment when speaking might actually matter. "Lord Karen," she said, voice amplified by systems that suddenly recognized her authority to speak, "you accused me of having no lineage, of being nobody. But I know exactly who I am." She raised her tablet, "And I know exactly what you've done." Karen's expression flickered. "Careful, girl. Slander against a seated lord is it slander when I have the original documents?" Lysera's fingers moved across the screen. She'd been preparing for this moment without knowing it, years of careful archiving suddenly crystallizing into purpose. "I have recorded every council session for 6 years, every vote, every revision, every deletion." The hall's displays lit up with files, cascading walls of data that Lysera had preserved when she was supposed to have let them disappear. Document 1. Karen's proposal to cut emergency life support redundancies in lower residential sectors, savings allocated to decorative improvements in the Crown Hall. Lysera's voice was steady, clinical, reading like she was cataloging inventory. 73 maintenance requests denied, 2 hull breaches in the following year, 17 deaths attributed to equipment failure. The crowd was silent now, attention locked on the damning paper trail. Document 2. Relocation order for the Valori labor settlements. Official reason, efficiency of resource allocation. She looked up from her tablet. Actual reason, the settlements were on land leased to Karen's mining subsidiary. 4,000 workers displaced. Compensation packages reduced from agreed terms by 63%. Karen's face had gone from gray to red. "This is a violation of classified." "Classified?" Lysera's laugh was sharp. "You classified the truth because it made you look bad." She gestured at the displays, at years of carefully preserved evidence. "I archived everything you told me to erase, every name you wanted forgotten, every policy you wanted sanitized, every crime you wanted disappeared." Sigma Oren's voice joined hers, cold and absolute. Cross-reference analysis, complete. Subject, Chiron Thalos. 341 incidents of record manipulation. Systematic suppression of opposition voices. Deletion of inconvenient genealogical data. The AI paused, and when it spoke again, there was something that might have been anger in its ancient voice, including deliberate erasure of Telvaris family records to eliminate political opposition. The displays shifted to show a family, Lysera's family, parents, siblings, extended relatives. Political reformers, yes, but not violent, not dangerous, just people who'd believed that power should serve those it governed, not the other way around. And next to those images, execution orders signed by a coalition that included a younger Chiron Thalos. Lysera stared at the images of parents she barely remembered. "They didn't just erase the records," she whispered. She looked at Chiron, "you killed them." "It was political necessity," Chiron said, and his voice had lost all its theatrical polish. His advisors tried to pull him back, but he shook them off, pride overriding survival instinct. The Telvaris faction was destabilizing the entire regional council. They were pushing for democratic reforms that would have collapsed the governance structure. "We had to murder them?" Elias stepped forward, and the fury in his voice surprised even him. "Had to orphan children? Had to spend decades erasing any proof they existed?" "They were a threat to order," Chiron snapped. "No," Lysera said quietly, "we were a threat to you. To the idea that some people are born to rule and others are born to serve." She looked at the crown, at the light still surrounding her. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not worthiness, Not divine recognition, just terror that someone might actually check whether the people in charge deserve to be there. Elias watched her and saw what the crown had seen. Not someone weak, not someone nobody. Someone who'd survived erasure and turned it into evidence. Someone who'd been silenced and spent years recording every word that was meant to disappear. The crowd was fracturing now, lower-level workers pushing forward, recognizing their own grievances in the documents Lysara had preserved. Upper-level representatives trying to calculate which way to jump, whether to distance themselves from Chiron or defend the system that had elevated them. And in the middle of it all, two people who'd been invisible for years, suddenly undeniably visible. Sigma Orun processed the chaos, calculated probabilities, and made a decision. Advisory notice: human technician Monroe will now be evaluated for shared governance role. Elias flinched. What? No. I told you I'm not requesting permission, the AI interrupted. Crown protocol clear, moral compass identified, wisdom and service recognized. Refusal to seek power noted as primary qualification. A holographic construct materialized in front of Elias. A series of questions, ethical scenarios, impossible choices designed to reveal character under pressure. If you could save one sector but sacrifice another, which would you choose? The construct asked. Neither, Elias said immediately. I'd find a third option or die trying. If a superior ordered you to ignore a safety violation, would you comply? Not even once. His jaw set. Never again. If power made you comfortable, would you still check the systems at 3 in the morning? He thought about his brother, about Lysara, about every invisible person keeping the tower alive. Yeah, he said quietly, because comfort's not the point. Making sure people wake up tomorrow is. The construct dissolved. Sigma Orun's voice carried something that might have been approval. Evaluation complete. Subject: Monroe. Qualified for advisory role with veto authority on safety protocols. Chiron was shouting now, advisors trying to pull him toward the exits. You cannot do this. The crown is ceremonial. It has no legal authority to. Incorrect. Sigma Orun interrupted. Crown authority supersedes council governance per founding. Charter Article 1. Governance by worthiness, not inheritance. The ancient contract, buried in centuries of tradition, suddenly activated. The crown had always had the power to overrule the council. It just hadn't found anyone worthy to wield it in 3 generations. Until now. Lysara looked at Elias. He looked back. And in that moment, they both understood that everything had changed. Not because they wanted power, because the one thing that terrified them both was the idea of people suffering while those in charge looked away. And the crown had just made it impossible for anyone to look away from them ever again. The formal inquiry began 6 hours later. Chiron had regrouped, called in favors, activated every political alliance he'd spent decades building. If he couldn't erase what had happened in the Crown Hall, he could at least frame it properly. Technical malfunction, human tampering, an unfortunate archivist with delusions of significance. The inquiry chamber was smaller than the Crown Hall, but no less intimidating. Council representatives from major species coalitions filled the seats, faces carefully neutral, waiting to see which direction the political wind would blow. Elias sat in a chair that felt designed to make humans uncomfortable. Too tall, wrong angles, like the furniture itself was reminding him he didn't belong here. Lysara was in a separate chamber, isolated, probably facing her own interrogation. Ambassador Drex of the Korath delegation leaned forward, scales gleaming under the harsh lights. Technician Monroe, you've worked in Coronaspire for 3 years. In that time, how many times have you accessed the Crown Hall systems? Elias checked his data pad. 47 logged maintenance calls, environmental controls, power distribution, sensor array calibration, all documented. And how many times have you accessed those systems without logging them? Never. His voice was flat. Every entry requires biometric verification. If I'm in the hall, there's a record. Yet somehow, Drex continued, the Crown's ancient systems activated in a way they haven't for 3 generations. Coincidentally, while you were present, he let that hang. Some might call that suspicious. Some might, Elias agreed. Others might call it the Crown doing exactly what it's designed to do. Recognize people who actually care about something other than themselves. A Draven representative, one of Chiron's coalition, spoke up. The human displays remarkable arrogance for someone whose species has been in galactic society for barely a century. Perhaps Earth's youth makes them unaware of certain protocols, certain hierarchies that exist for good reason. There it was, the anti-Terra faction, using this as leverage to push humans back down the ladder. Elias had been expecting it. What he hadn't been expecting was what came next. Chiron entered the chamber, face grave, carrying a data tablet. He approached Elias directly, and his voice was almost gentle, terrible, sympathetic. "Mr. Monroe, I've been reviewing your personnel file. Your father still lives on Earth, yes? In the new Seattle district?" Elias's blood went cold. "He's retired," Elias said carefully. "Mining operations supervisor, lives on his pension." "Yes," Chiron agreed. "A pension administered through the Galactic Labor Relations Board, which, sadly, has been flagged for review due to—" He glanced at the tablet. "Irregularities in eligibility verification for off-world workers' families." The threat was clear as crystal. "Play along or your father loses everything." Elias sat very still. "That's—" he started. He stopped. Started again. "That's not how this works. Pension eligibility is based on years served, not political convenience." "Normally, yes," Chiron said. "But these are unusual circumstances. A review might take months, years even, during which time payments would be suspended pending investigation." He set the tablet down in front of Elias. "Of course, if this matter were resolved quickly, if you were to acknowledge that perhaps you misunderstood what happened with the Crown, that you were caught up in the moment, that you're not actually qualified for any advisory role, well, the investigation would likely find everything in order." Elias looked at the tablet, looked at Chiron, looked at all the representatives watching to see if the human would break. He thought about his father, about the man who hadn't spoken to him properly in 3 years, who blamed him for not saving his brother, who'd still go hungry if Elias didn't send money home every month. He thought about Lysera, probably facing similar pressure in another room, about all the workers in the lower levels who'd seen someone like them actually recognized, about his brother's face the last time they talked, excited about his new job, ready to prove himself. "I need time," Elias said quietly, "to think about this." "Of course," Chiron said smoothly. "Take the night. We reconvene tomorrow morning." He leaned in close. "Choose wisely, Mr. Monroe. Some responsibilities are beyond human capacity. There's no shame in admitting it." They let him leave. Elias walked through the corridors on autopilot, not seeing the curious stares, not hearing the whispered conversations. He found himself at the maintenance access to his secret terrace without consciously choosing to go there. The night air was cold, sharp. He sat on the edge of the platform and put his head in his hands. "I can't do this." The words came out broken. "I can't fail again. Can't let him lose everything because I thought I could be someone I'm not." "You could walk away." Lysara's voice came from behind him. "I'd understand." He turned. She looked exhausted, eyes red. "They let you go?" "For now. They'll want me back tomorrow. To recant everything. Say I've falsified records, that I'm confused, traumatized, making accusations I can't prove." She sat beside him. "They offered to restore my family name if I cooperate. Give me back everything they took. Are you going to?" She laughed, bitter and tired. "Which part? The name or the lies? The part where you get what you deserve." Lysara was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My family's name was erased because they told the truth about power. If I get it back by lying about you, about what happened, about what the Crown actually recognized. She looked at him. Then I'm just proving they were right to erase us. That truth doesn't matter. That power wins. Elias felt something crack in his chest. You'd lose everything. I've already lost everything, she said simply. They took it years ago. What Karen's offering isn't restoration. It's just a prettier way of staying erased. They sat in silence. Below them, the tower hummed with life. Thousands of people sleeping, working, living, all depending on systems maintained by people they'd never meet. Your father, Lysara said carefully. If you walk away, he'll be okay? Eventually? Maybe. Probably. Elias's voice cracked. I don't know. And that's what's killing me. Because last time I made the wrong choice. Last time I wasn't there when it mattered. My brother died. And if I choose to fight Karen, and my dad loses everything because of it, then I'm just proving I can't protect the people who matter. Lysara took his hand. The gesture was so natural now, so automatic. You didn't kill your brother, she said. And you won't kill your father by standing up to corruption. But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm not actually qualified for this? What if the Crown made a mistake? Then we figure it out together. She squeezed his fingers. But Elias, if you walk away because they threatened you, if I walk away because they bribed me, then everyone in those lower levels who saw themselves in us will learn the same lesson they've always learned, that people like us don't actually matter, that the system wins, that it's better to stay invisible. You were never invisible to me, he whispered. You were the first person who understood that taking care of others doesn't need an audience. And you were the first person who made me feel like existing wasn't something I had to apologize for. She leaned against his shoulder. So maybe we're both wrong. Maybe we're both unqualified. Maybe this whole thing is a disaster waiting to happen. But at least if we fail trying to make sure people don't get erased anymore. Elias looked at the stars, thought about his brother, about his father, about every person in the tower depending on systems nobody acknowledged. Sigma Oren's voice whispered through his datapad, quiet enough that only he could hear. Advisory notice. Lower-level workers requesting assembly authorization. Subject. Testimony in support of Crown selection. He looked at the datapad, then at Lysara. Did you? He started. Not me, she said, but Sigma has access to all communication networks, and apparently it's been sending messages to every person whose life you saved with your invisible maintenance work. Elias stared at the authorization request. 5,000 people, workers from every species, every level, every sector he'd ever quietly fixed, all asking permission to speak, for him. Maybe, he said slowly, maybe the Crown didn't make a mistake. Maybe it just saw something we're still learning to see in ourselves. Lysara smiled, tired but real. Tomorrow's going to be hard. Yeah. He smiled back. But tonight, we know who we are, and that would have to be enough. The inquiry chamber wasn't designed to hold 5,000 people. But they came anyway. They started arriving before dawn, filling the public galleries, spilling into the corridors, standing in spaces that were technically off-limits, but that nobody had the authority or courage to evacuate. Maintenance workers in their coveralls, archive assistants with datapads, janitors, technicians, cargo handlers, kitchen staff. Every species, every level, every person who'd ever been treated as infrastructure instead of individual. Elias arrived to find the chamber transformed. What had been an intimidating council space now looked like something else entirely. A gathering, a movement, a collective statement that some people were done being invisible. Chiron arrived with his advisors and stopped dead. His carefully arranged inquiry, designed to quietly pressure two people into submission, had become the most watched event in recent galactic history. The feeds were everywhere, not just official channels. Personal streams, social networks, underground broadcasts. Across 100 worlds, people were tuning in to watch what the commentators were already calling the Rally of the Invisible. Ambassador Drex called the session to order, but his voice lacked its usual authority. He looked at the packed galleries, at the thousands of faces watching, and seemed to realize that this wasn't his chamber anymore. Before we begin, a Valori woman stood from the gallery. Her name tag identified her as a Level 47 Environmental Systems Operator. I request permission to testify. This is not, Drex started. Denied, Karen snapped. This inquiry is limited to established witnesses. Then you'll need to deny all of us, another voice called out. A human man this time, older, cargo bay supervisor. Because we all have testimony about Technician Monroe. The murmur started then, spreading through the chamber. Voices joining voices, a wave of people who decided that staying quiet wasn't protecting them anymore. Drex looked at Karen, looked at the crowd, made a calculation about which fight he could actually win. Proceed, he said, but keep it brief. The Valori woman approached the testimony platform. My name is Kieran. 3 years ago, a pressure valve failed in my sector. It was logged, reported, supposed to be fixed within a week. But maintenance was behind schedule, understaffed, and my sector wasn't priority. She looked directly at Elias. He came at night, off shift. Didn't file paperwork because paperwork meant delays. Just fixed it. I asked him why. You know what he said? Elias remembered. Of course he remembered. He said, because if I don't, someone might die. And I've already failed at stopping that once. She turned to the council. That's who you're telling me isn't qualified? The person who saved 43 people and never told anyone because he wasn't doing it for credit? More voices joined. A Korath engineer who Elias had spent 6 hours teaching proper safety protocols to, time he'd never logged. A Draven maintenance apprentice he'd trained personally because the official program had cut corners. A human medical technician whose life support systems Elias had triple-checked after hearing her mention she was pregnant. One by one they testified, not about grand heroics, about small acts, invisible work, the kind of care that prevented disasters instead of responding to them. Lucera sat in the witness section, watching the testimonies with tears streaming down her face. This was what Sigma had done. Connected every person Elias had helped, given them a platform they'd never had before. Then a notification flashed across the public displays. A social media hashtag had gone viral across the galactic networks. She's not nobody. It had started as a simple post from someone in the lower archives. A picture of Lysara at her terminal. Before the crown. Before everything. Just working. The caption read, She filed my grandmother's evacuation petition when everyone else ignored it. She's not nobody. She's the reason my family is alive. Then another post. And another. Thousands of them. People whose paperwork Lysara had processed with care when others would have stamped it through. Whose family records she'd preserved when they were supposed to be deleted. Whose truth she'd archived when everyone else was invested in forgetting. The hashtag spread. Within hours it had become a movement. People posting pictures of invisible workers who kept their worlds running. Maintenance crews, archivists, cleaners, data processors. Everyone who'd been told their work didn't matter. Suddenly visible, suddenly valued, suddenly refusing to be erased. Karen's face had gone from red to pale. This, he said, voice shaking, this is manipulation. Coordinated attack on legitimate governance by what? Elias stood. His voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden silence, it carried. By people finally saying out loud that we see you, that we know what you've done, that maybe, just maybe, someone who actually checks if people are safe should have a say in safety policy. The galleries erupted in cheers. Drex tried to restore order, failed. The chamber had tipped into something beyond procedure. Elias walked to the center platform. He'd never been good at public speaking, never wanted the attention. But looking at all those faces, all those people who'd been invisible like him, he realized that staying silent wasn't an option anymore. My brother died, he said, and the room went quiet, because it's hard not to respect grief spoken plainly. He died because someone decided that schedules mattered more than safety checks. Because someone with authority made a choice, and the person without authority wasn't there to stop it. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the podium. I've spent 3 years trying to make up for not being there. Working every shift I could, checking every system twice. Being the person who says, wait, that's not safe. Even when nobody asked my opinion. He looked at Chiron. And you want me to walk away from a role that would let me actually enforce those safety checks? That would give authority to the people who've been screaming about problems everyone else ignores? He shook his head. My brother died because nobody with power chose to listen. Lysara's family died because people with power felt threatened by truth. How many more people have to die before we admit that maybe, just maybe, the current system isn't working for anyone except the people already on top? The applause was deafening. Chiron stood, fury finally overtaking political calculation. You're a maintenance technician with delusions of significance. The Crown made an error, one we will correct, and... No. Lysara's voice cut through. She'd stood, and there was something different about her now. The curved shoulders were straight. The apologetic posture was gone. She looked like someone who'd remembered who she was before the galaxy tried to erase her. The Crown didn't make an error. It just saw what you've spent decades hiding. That power isn't about lineage or authority or who has the best title. She gestured at the packed galleries. It's about whether you can be trusted to care for people when nobody's watching. And you can't. But he can. She looked at Elias. We can. Sigma Oren's voice resonated through the chamber speakers. Advisory. Notice. Formal coronation will proceed at sunset. Crown authority. Supersedes inquiry. Council may vote to accept or reject final selection, but cannot delay recognition of qualified candidates. The ancient protocols, long dormant, were activating. The Crown had chosen. Now the galaxy had to decide whether to honor its own founding principles or abandon them for convenience. Chiron opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the thousands of faces watching, at the feeds broadcasting to billions more, at the movement he'd accidentally helped create by trying to crush 2 people. And slowly, the fury drained into something that might have been the first honest emotion Elias had ever seen on his face. Defeat. The vote would happen. But standing there, watching people who'd been invisible their whole lives finally demand to be seen, Elias knew which way it would go. Not because they'd won some political game, but because sometimes, just sometimes, the truth is loud enough that even the powerful can't ignore it. Sunset painted Corona Spire in gold and crimson. The Crown Hall had been prepared for a coronation nobody had expected. Every species delegation present, billions watching across the galactic networks, and at the center of it all, an ancient artifact that hadn't chosen anyone in 3 generations, suddenly preparing to recognize 2 people who'd spent their lives being ignored. Elias stood at the base of the stairs leading to the Crown, wearing the same maintenance uniform he'd worn every day for 3 years. Someone had offered him ceremonial robes. He'd declined. If the Crown wanted him, it would get him as he was, a technician who fixed things, scared of failing, still carrying his brother's ghost. Lysara stood beside him in her archivist's uniform, simple and practical. Her hands were steady now. She'd spent the day going through records with Sigma Oren, documenting everything, building the foundation for whatever came next, planning how to use power before she even had it, because that's what you did when you actually respected responsibility. Sigma Oren's voice filled the hall, formal now, following protocols that were older than most civilizations present. Crown recognition ceremony, commencing candidate Lysara Telveris of species Valori. Candidate advisory. Elias Monroe of species Human. Approach the Crown. They climbed the stairs together. The Crown waited on its pedestal, crystals glowing softly, like it had been holding its breath for years, and could finally exhale. Chiron stood in the delegation section, flanked by his advisors. His face was carefully neutral, but Elias could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The Lord had lost this battle, but he was already planning the next war. how to minimize damage, how to maintain influence, how to ensure that even with new leadership, the old system stayed mostly intact. The council vote had been close. 43% in favor of accepting the Crown's choice, 37% opposed, 20% abstaining, waiting to see which way the political wind blew before committing. Not exactly a ringing endorsement, but enough to proceed. Sigma Orin continued the ritual. Crown protocol requires acceptance statement from chosen bearer. Lizara Telvaris, do you accept the responsibility of galactic guidance? Do you understand that power serves people, not self? Lizara stepped forward, placed her hand on the crown. The light pulsed, recognizing her touch. I accept, she said. Her voice didn't shake. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she decided fear wasn't a reason to refuse. On the condition that truth is never again erased for convenience. That no person's existence is deleted because they're politically inconvenient. That archives remain complete and accessible to all. Condition acknowledged and accepted, Sigma Orin intoned. The crown lifted from its pedestal, hovering in the air, preparing to settle on its chosen bearer. Then Sigma Orin's voice shifted, addressing Elias. Advisory candidate Elias Monroe. Crown recognition requires your consent for shared governance role. You will have veto authority over all safety protocols, infrastructure decisions, and protection policies. Do you accept? Every eye in the hall focused on him. Elias looked at the crown, looked at Lysera, looked at the thousands of people watching, waiting to see if someone like them could actually matter in a system designed to keep them small. He thought about his brother, about the supervisor who'd cut corners, about the report that blamed human error and closed the case. He thought about his father, probably watching this broadcast from Earth, seeing his surviving son stand in front of the entire galaxy. He thought about every system he'd fixed at 3 in the morning, every redundant check he'd run, every time he'd stayed silent when he should have spoken. Not this time. I have a condition, he said. The hall went silent. Sigma Orin processed, state your condition. Elias took a breath, then another, then spoke the words that had been building for 3 years. I don't want to be the man with the crown. I don't want authority or recognition or power. What I want is to make sure that the next time someone says this isn't safe, they can't be ignored. That the next time someone tries to cut corners that will get people killed, there's someone with the authority to stop them. He looked directly at Karen. So here's my condition. The first act of this new administration will be to establish what we're calling the Nobody Law. Simple rule. Any person in any council session, in any delegation, in any official capacity who refers to another person as nobody, as insignificant, as ignorable, as beneath consideration, immediately loses their voting rights for 1 full council cycle. Murmurs erupted. That would, one delegate started. That would make it politically costly to dehumanize people. Elias finished. Yeah, that's the point. He turned to the crown, to Sigma Orin. If you want me in any kind of advisory role, that's my price. Make it hurt to treat people as disposable. The silence stretched. Then Sigma Orin's voice carried something that might have been approval. Condition evaluated. Aligned with Crown core values, recognition of inherent worth, protection of vulnerable, authority balanced by empathy. Condition accepted. Lex Monroe, Lysara activated. Nobody Law added to Galactic Charter effective immediately. The crown descended onto Lysara's head, adapting to her features, beautiful and radiant. Light cascaded through the hall, and for a moment everyone watching saw what the crown saw. Not an archivist, not a victim, not someone to be pitied or ignored. A leader who understood that power meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. A bracelet of light formed around Elias's wrist, cool metal that pulsed gently against his skin. Not a crown, not authority for its own sake, just a reminder that he'd been recognized, that his voice now carried weight, that when he said, "Wait, that's not safe," people would have to listen. The hall erupted in cheers. Not everyone, But enough. The galleries, the lower levels, people across the galaxy who'd been waiting their whole lives to see someone like them actually matter. Sigma Oran's voice cut through the celebration. Administrative consequence. Lord Chiron Thalos, record shows 341 violations of the newly established Nobody Law across archived communications. Penalty. Voting rights suspended for 341 council cycles. Chiron's face went white. That's, he started. You can't retroactively. Charter amendment includes review of past conduct, the AI said, implacable. Alternative penalty. 1 cycle service in infrastructure committee, direct contact with maintenance personnel, mandatory report filing on safety concerns from lower-level workers. The choice was clear: lose political power for the rest of his life, or spend 1 year actually listening to the people he'd dismissed. Karen looked at Elias, at Lysara, at the crown glowing on her head and the bracelet on his wrist. "I'll take the committee assignment," he said quietly. It was the first honest thing Elias had ever heard him say. The ceremony concluded with traditional protocols, but everything felt different now. Lysara wasn't just crowned. She was recognized. Elias wasn't just advisory. He was empowered. And across the galaxy, millions of invisible people were learning that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to stay invisible forever. As the hall emptied, as delegates dispersed to process what had happened, Lysara and Elias stood together on the platform, looking at the crowd. "You know," she said softly, "we might have just made a lot of very powerful enemies." "Yeah," Elias agreed. "Probably. Was it worth it?" He looked at his bracelet, thought about his brother, about his father, about every person who'd testified, about the movement that had formed around 2 people who just wanted to make sure others were safe. "Ask me in a year," he said. "But right now? Yeah. It was worth it." Lysara smiled. The crown caught the light, and for a moment, she looked exactly like what she was, someone who'd been erased, rebuilt herself, and decided that nobody else should have to do the same. "Come on," she said. "We have work to do." And together, they descended the stairs to begin the hard part. Not ruling, protecting, not commanding, serving. Because that's what the crown had always wanted. Someone who understood that power was just responsibility with witnesses, and they'd spent their whole lives learning how to carry responsibility without any. 6 weeks later, the tower had learned to breathe differently. The Nobody Law was read aloud at the start of every council session now, a reminder carved into daily practice. The first delegate to violate it, a Korath trade representative who dismissed a data analyst's concerns as coming from irrelevant personnel, lost voting rights for 1 cycle. The second violation happened 3 days later, then one more the following week. After that, people started choosing their words more carefully. Lysara sat in meetings now. Not at the head of the table, she'd refused that, but present, crown dim but visible, asking questions nobody had thought to ask before. Why are safety inspections scheduled around political calendars? Who determines which sectors get infrastructure upgrades first? Can you show me the actual data supporting that decision, not the summary? Elias still worked maintenance shifts, insisted on it. But now when he flagged a safety concern, it didn't disappear into paperwork limbo. It went directly to council review, with his advisory authority backing it. The first time he'd exercised veto power, overruling a vote to delay emergency repairs in lower residential sectors, 3 delegates had filed formal protests. Sigma Oran had denied all 3. The real change, though, was quieter. Archive assistants no longer deleted inconvenient data. Maintenance logs were read by people who actually understood what they meant. Workers who'd spent careers being furniture found that their expertise suddenly mattered. Not everywhere, not perfectly, but enough to feel different. Karen's transformation was slower. The first week of his infrastructure committee assignment, he'd shown up late. Delegation sour, treating it like punishment to be endured. Lysara had assigned him to shadow a maintenance crew in the lower environmental systems. 12-hour shifts in tight corridors, checking seals and testing air quality, and doing the invisible work that kept 40,000 people alive. By week 3, he'd stopped complaining. By week 5, he'd started asking questions. Real ones. How do you prioritize repairs with limited resources? What do you do when a system fails and you don't have the right parts? How do you decide what's critical versus what can wait? Now, 6 weeks in, he'd filed his first safety report. Detailed analysis of structural stress in the outer hull sections with specific recommendations and cost projections. It wasn't perfect, but it was thorough, and it was signed Lord Karen Thalos Infrastructure Safety Advisory. No medals, no theatrical language, just work. Elias had read it twice looking for the angle, the political maneuvering, found only genuine concern about bulkhead integrity. Maybe people could change, or maybe Karen was just good at adapting to survive. Time would tell. The records restoration project had become Lysara's personal mission. Every night after council sessions, she returned to the archives, working with Sigma O-Run to recover deleted files, restore erased names, rebuild histories that powerful people had tried to bury. Her family's records were complete now. Parents, siblings, extended relatives. Political reformers, yes, but also gardeners, artists, teachers. People who'd believed in something better and died for it. She'd created a memorial gallery in the public archives. Every erased name restored. Every deleted voice given space to speak. Thousands of them. Entire movements. Entire philosophies. Entire lives that the galaxy had been told didn't matter. Now they did. In database entries, in historical records, in the permanent archive that nobody could delete anymore. The evening air on Elias's secret terrace was cold. Not his secret anymore, really. He'd shown it to Lysra that night 6 weeks ago, and now it was their space. The place they came when the weight of visibility got too heavy, when being important was exhausting and they needed to remember how to just be. Lysara arrived with 2 cups of terrible coffee, the same kind they'd shared in the archive. Some things didn't need to be fancy. Some things were better simple. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker through the evening clouds. You know, Lysara said eventually, technically you're a co-regent now. Moral advisor with veto authority. There are historical precedents that would give you actual political power if you wanted it. Yeah, Elias said. I read the brief Sigma sent. He sipped his coffee. I deleted it. I'm not interested in political power. I'm interested in making sure that when someone like me says this system is about to fail, people listen. That is political power, she pointed out. Maybe, but it's the boring kind, the kind that prevents disasters instead of responding to them. He glanced at her. How about you? Crown feeling heavy? Every day. She smiled. But not in a bad way. More like, it reminds me I exist. That I'm not just background noise anymore. That I can say this is wrong and people have to at least pretend to care. Progress, Elias said dryly. Lysara laughed, the sound lighter than it had been weeks ago. You know what the best part is? Not the crown, not the authority. She looked at him. It's that the galaxy had to admit they were wrong. That you and I, the invisible ones, the nobodies, were exactly what the crown was looking for. That all their lineage and tradition and performance meant nothing compared to 2 broken people who just wanted others to be safe. Elias reached over, took her hand. The gesture was natural now, easy, like breathing. You were never nobody, he said. You know that, right? I do now. She squeezed his fingers. But I needed to hear it from the galaxy, not just you. Needed them to see what you saw. She paused, and I needed to see it in myself. They sat with that. The bracelet on Elias's wrist pulsed softly, monitoring tower systems out of habit, alerting him to minor variations he'd investigate tomorrow. The crown on Lysara's head, visible when she let it be, had integrated into her life like it had always been there. Sigma Oren's voice whispered through Elias's datapad, quiet enough not to intrude. Advisory notice. Similar crown artifacts detected in 14 other regions. Dormant. Awaiting recognition of qualified candidates. Elias raised an eyebrow. You seeing this? Lazara checked her own interface. I am now. She looked at the star map Sigma was generating. 14 more crowns. 14 more chances for people like us. Or 14 more systems where nobody like us exists yet, Elias said. He thought about it. You think Sigma wants us to do something about that? Negative, the AI responded. Crown Protocol does not impose expansion, merely observes that similar need exists elsewhere. But you're telling us anyway, Lysera said. Affirmative, information is power. How you use it determines whether that power serves or destroys. They looked at each other, at the tower below, at the stars above. Later, Elias said. First we make sure this one actually works. Prove the model. Show the galaxy that invisible people can lead without becoming what we fought against. Agreed, Lysara said. But later, she smiled. When we figured out how to do this without collapsing from exhaustion, maybe we help others find what we found. Elias thought about maintenance workers on other worlds. Archivists filing away truths nobody wanted preserved. People everywhere who did essential work and got treated like furniture. Yeah, he said. Maybe we do. Lysera leaned her head on his shoulder. The crown's light dimmed to nearly invisible, just a faint glow in the darkness. Elias's bracelet settled into passive monitoring, content to just exist for a moment without urgency. Below them, Corona Spire hummed with life, systems working, people sleeping. A galaxy slowly learning that worth wasn't about birth or title or performance. It was about showing up, checking the systems, telling the truth, protecting others even when nobody was watching, and maybe sometimes having the courage to be visible when the universe needed you to be. The stars wheeled overhead. Somewhere out there, 14 other crowns waited. 14 other chances for invisible people to be seen. 14 other opportunities to prove that power could serve instead of consume. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, 2 people who'd spent their lives being nobody sat on a forgotten terrace and allowed themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were exactly enough. The galaxy had wanted kings. It got maintenance technicians. It had wanted noble bloodlines. It got trauma survivors. It had wanted perfection. It got 2 people scared of failing, but moving forward anyway. And when that ancient crown finally chose, it picked not the speeches or the titles or the performance. It picked the truth, the care, the stubborn refusal to let others be erased. It picked humanity's greatest strength, worn by an alien woman and witnessed by a broken human man. And together, they were teaching the galaxy something it had forgotten, that nobody should ever be nobody, that invisible work is still work, that the person checking the systems at 3 in the morning matters just as much as the person signing the policies, and that sometimes the best leaders are the ones who never wanted to lead. They just wanted everyone to get home safe. Everything else was details. In the end, maybe this whole story wasn't about a crown, a council, or a galaxy. Maybe it was just 2 people discovering that the smallest acts, truth whispered in the dark, safety checks nobody sees, can shift the gravity of an entire civilization. Sometimes humanity isn't a species. It's a choice we make in the silence when no one is watching. So let me ask you something. When was the last time you noticed someone the world treats as invisible and actually saw them? What would change in your life if the next decision you made wasn't about being right, but about keeping someone safe? And if the universe suddenly handed you a crown, real or metaphorical, would you run from it or finally speak the truth you've been swallowing for years? If you stayed with us until this final heartbeat of the story, write the word visible in the comments so we know you were here with us in this moment. Tell us your city, because across the stars, community begins when we know where each other stands. If this journey moved you, subscribe, like, hype it up, share it with someone who needs to remember their own worth, and watch the next story waiting in the card on your screen. After all, nobody should ever be nobody.